Hey, welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute here. Let everyone file in. Feel free, if you want to jump kind of ahead, feel free to drop any questions you have in chat and we'll get started here in a few minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Couple housekeeping things before we start here. Welcome to Office Hours. We're excited to have you guys here today. If this is your first time, we do this every first Wednesday of the month, and we basically set aside an hour to open up the doors and say, hey, if you have any questions, anything that you're stuck on, feel free to join us, and we'll do our best to get you unstuck. One other thing, we do record these sessions. We may use them, in YouTube videos or other types of content. And if there's any parts where we're interacting and you would prefer it to not be recorded, just let us know and we can do our best to accommodate that. We are streaming to both a Teams meeting and YouTube. So for those of you on YouTube, you can use chat to drop any questions in. For those of you in the Teams meeting, you have the luxury of, if you want to unmute, you can raise your hand and we can interact with you that way and have a little bit more of a conversational back and forth. Let's see, anything else? Typically, we start with a few questions that we've heard from our community and, just basically start that way and then open up for questions after that. But we have a few people in here and it looks like a question or two. So I think we're going to get started and just jump right into the questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and Mike and
Sounds good.
it.
Thanks, Mitch. So the first question I see is from Ken, and it looks like he's spent some time playing with the theme template that I believe is one of our downloads, and he's excited about it and wonders if there's an issue with putting everything in the OnStart module of Power Apps. So that's question one. Do you want to
I can
start with
these,
that one?
Yeah. So I want to first start with the theme template has been around for quite a long time now. It's been around for 2 years probably now, at least. A lot has changed in the Power App platform since then. There's a lot that has changed within what I would consider to be theming within Canvas apps. So the first thing is OnStart isn't the best thing to use, mostly because it's going to go away. So Microsoft announced
6 months ago.
6 months ago or so that OnStart is going to be going away. Technically today it's depreciated or deprecated, however you want to pronounce that, meaning that you're not supposed to use it anymore. In fact, if you create a new Power App, it's not on by default. You have to actually go into the settings of the Power App and enable it. We have an article out there about what to do about that. We have a couple articles out there that we probably can find and link in the
there's
chat.
a video about migrating away from App OnStart as a place to initiate your app. Yep.
Which the general approach there is to take your stuff from OnStart, and they now have a start screen. And so the idea is, or the easiest solution to the problem today is to actually put what you have in OnStart inside the on visible of the on or the start screen. And so what happens is your app, so again, where you click app and you would usually go to OnStart, instead of going to OnStart, you would go to the property called start screen. And then from the start screen, you would configure that to be, a landing page or something like that. And then from that landing page, in that on visible, I would put the contents of your OnStart. So that's the first thing. I would move away from OnStart more to your specific question, because then you could take your question and say, well, should I put all of my stuff in the on visible of my start page, which is basically the same question that you're asking, just on the new way of doing it, which is what I just talked about. So to do that, when we talk about that, what we really are talking about there is, it is okay to put everything that you need to put in the on visible. It's okay to have things load up in on visible that you need. The question is, what do you really need to have there, and how do you make it perform as efficiently as you can? The reason I say that is because your user will not be able to effectively use your application until that on visible is complete. Or in the case of OnStart is complete. Now, the benefit of doing it on visible is that your page will be visible while that thing is loading. So let's say you're caching a bunch of data. In the case of the theme template, the stuff that we're doing in the theme template is actually super easy and simple, and I wouldn't have any concern about that. It's going to load really quick. It's not going to be a huge issue. However, you're likely to want to cache a bunch of data, make some requests, do some other stuff as part of the on visible, and those things can take quite a bit of time. And so what we usually do is the on start, or the start screen, I should say, is a loading page that's in our format, our design, and that page would sit and load until that's complete. So then you can show like a status dial or something else while your content is loading. Whereas on start, as it was before, the user wouldn't get a lot of interaction. It would just sit there on the default loading screen of Power Apps before it would get to your screen. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And in the on start that happens on your own page, you can control what that looks like and give your user feedback. Tell them, hey, just getting a few things ready, or you can even change that out and say, when different things are happening, I'm caching this, I'm loading this, I'm doing this, so they get some feedback about what's going on.
And I think in the example that we share in our video, we kind of walk you through that migration, and ultimately it culminates in taking some of those actions and doing them in the on visible, but we add a timer to the start screen, and that timer basically, when the timer ends, is when we make a choice to navigate the user to the screen that they're supposed to go to. And so ultimately, we start the timer when a variable or a context variable becomes true. And so that'll be something that you can do in your on visible of your loading screen or your start screen, is at the very end of all of your logic where you're loading your data, you then set that context variable to true. Your timer then will start as soon as that variable comes true. Your timer runs for, let's say, 2 seconds, or even less if you need it to. And then on timer end, you choose to navigate the user to the first screen that's actually going to let them do something. And that's detailed in that video. It's a pretty decent strategy. The other thing that I'll note is there is a final solution coming from Microsoft, although it's not available yet. That's a way to allow you to load logic in a modular way, so that you can kind of manage that type of stuff in a better way.
Yeah, it's actually a completely different approach to managing. So I'll step one back to explain what Microsoft is doing in the future. Microsoft's realized that the primary use of OnStart is for caching and loading data that would be used throughout your application, much like in the theme template, which is used for caching all of the theming data that's out there. And basically, they would turn that into a function rather than an actual static piece of data. So unlike today where you would go into OnStart and load stuff into those things, you would say, hey, this variable equates to this chunk of code that actually gets it, and it would dynamically go and sense when that changes and just go automatically update and cache it. That's the theory. It's way early on. I don't know of anybody who has any real good detail about how it actually really, really works, but that's what is coming down the pipe, which we talk about a little bit in the video.
Also, the second part of your question is there a similar template for mobile devices?
The mobile devices. I forgot about that.
We
So
created
there's
one.
Yeah, so we created but where did we do what, Mitch? What did we do with it? Did we load it somewhere?
No, I think it was just a one-off, but we
somebody
can
asked.
send it.
Yeah, so we'll post a version of this one. Just to be clear, you can convert and I was looking it up and I have it here. There's a article out there, and there's actually an app from Microsoft that you could use if you wanted to do that too, that will convert a app from one to the other, quote unquote. It's really just a couple settings within the XML file, so it involves bringing it down, cracking up the cab file, modifying it, uploading it back up, etc. But you can convert from one to the other, generally speaking. Yeah.
You still have to walk through your screens and make sure everything.
Yeah, you still have to make sure everything looks right and all of that stuff. Yep.
Yep.
So I put a thumbs up on that because we answered that question. If you have an issue or if you don't think it answered all the way, just ask another question or tag it so that we kind of know what's going on with it. The next question is, our office plans to create an environment for HR by the end of the beginning of next year. In the meantime, we've decided to build applications and not lose momentum on the default environment. We will need to transfer these over to the new environment. Any advice? So my first advice would be to start to understand a little bit about exporting and importing, because that's what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to export your flows from one to the other. The next thing I would encourage you to do would be to start, or when you are able to, so when you get that environment, to start learning about doing solutions. Solutions are when you're not doing personal automation, where I'm not trying to create a one-off thing for me to do my stuff. Solutions are huge. They allow you to do lots of different things. They allow you to package a lot of different things together. Power Automate, Power Apps, connections, data. If you're doing stuff in data, like you can package all sorts of stuff all in one bundle and move them easily between that. So for example, if you have 4 flows that all are part of the same thing, right? Maybe you have an approval flow, maybe you have a email flow or a monitoring flow that maybe says, hey, something's, a reminder flow. You can package those all up into a solution, and then you can export that solution and import that into a new environment. And assuming you have connectors and connections and stuff, it just works. Like you just move it to a new environment and it just starts working.
Yep. And I would, just to add a little bit of context to that, what people have found in the default environment when using solutions is that they're not a great fit because there is not a good method around sharing those things with the appropriate people. So if you deploy a solution to your default environment, everybody in the environment, or everybody that has access to that default environment, which is everybody, will have access to that solution and the components within it. So the ultimate, like down the road where you want to be going to, is a scenario where you maybe have developer environments for your individual people who are building these flows and these Power Apps and things like that, and they would be able to incorporate those apps and flows and whatever those components are into a solution, and they could then export that solution from their developer environment into a either shared business environment or department environment, or even like a dev, test, prod type scenario where you're actually managing the life cycle of those applications. And then in addition to that, if you get beyond that, there is now an ALM, an application lifecycle management accelerator that Microsoft has out there in the community that you can actually use to both manage that deployment and tracking that from one environment to the next, so in a dev, test, production scenario. But you can also connect it to, if you're actually building real applications that you care about, whether or not somebody's making a change that's going to break something, you can actually use that same tool to check your changes into a source control tool like DevOps, for example, and track activity against tasks and so on and so forth, and kind of manage it soup to nuts the way that you would a traditional software development solution.
So one other thing, I don't know whether or not you're in GCC, so the government cloud or not, but the in non-government clouds, there's another type of environment called development environment. that may be of interest to you. That is something that's really meant for a person to do development. And that may be something that somebody could create you earlier, and you could even start doing development in that environment instead of having to wait for your HR development or environment. The only problem with that is that the development environment, it's meant for you, so you can't just share it with a bunch of people. You can't use it like a production environment, but you can create solutions there. It's you know, in a maybe not an ideal world, but with the ALM solution, what you're supposed to be able to do is I have a development environment, Mike has a development environment, he's working on one thing, I'm working on another thing, and then we bring them together at the end to kind of join them together and then put them actually out somewhere else and deploy to a production environment.
Which is one of the other challenges you have with a single environment. If you have more than one developer working on the same Canvas app, for example, you can't work on it simultaneously. So the ALM accelerator, along with developer environments, help to resolve that conflict or that challenge of collaborating on apps.
So hopefully that answers the question. Again, if not, just hit us up.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand if you want to come. If you want to come off mute, you're more than welcome to.
We have a question from Christina, and then one on YouTube.
Okay, so Christina's question is there a way to search a PDF attachment for keywords to assign metadata tags?
In Power Automate.
Yeah, in Power Automate. I think the quick answer is probably not out of the box. You're probably talking about a third-party tool that you would need. But I would have lots of questions about what you're trying to do. So for example, if I'm putting that into a SharePoint site, all of that content that's in the PDF, assuming it's not an image or something, will automatically be indexed by SharePoint. SharePoint knows how to go in and look for that and find stuff. So obviously that doesn't answer your question. If you really are looking for adding individual tags,
so that would make it searchable, but that doesn't necessarily solve the tag.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to add the tags so you can do browsing, like if that's what you're trying to do, filtering, that kind of stuff, obviously that won't cut it. I believe there are some third-party tools that will allow you to crack open PDFs and do things like that. The two that I'm thinking of offhand, I can't remember their names all the way, but there's a couple that I think can do something like that. But I would be looking at a third party. Here, let me see if I can find it quick.
Do any of, Matt, do you know off the top of your head, do any of the AI components, I know a lot of them are like preview and stuff like that. Do any of those do text scan?
I mean, they do, but I don't know that they do anything with PDFs in particular. Because PDFs are, like it was for a long time, PDFs weren't even scanned by SharePoint, right?
Yeah.
It's only in the last 5 years or so that they've really, maybe 10, that they've been able to get around that because they had to build their own thing into.
So I know that we can convert a Word document to a PDF document. Can you go the other way around?
Document to a PDF document. Yeah, you can take a PDF document
and turn it into a Word.
You can do all sorts of stuff, but it doesn't.
If I turned it into a Word document, could I extract the text from the Word document?
The problem is to convert the two. I think you would still need a third party.
Well, so you convert Word to PDF in OneDrive.
Yes, correct. There's also an action for it.
Yep. Can I do the reverse of that?
I don't know of an out-of-the-box action that would do it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, though. I'm going to look up quick while you're looking at the next question, what those... Because I was looking at one not that long ago for somebody that was asking. I just can't remember the name.
All right, so Mitch, what's our YouTube question?
Question is, any thoughts on Pages? It looks like Portals is moving in the right direction. I said, keep up the good content. Thank you.
You're basically referring to the rename that Microsoft is doing of Power Apps Portals. They're now calling it Power Apps Pages. Generally speaking, I like Power Apps Portals. I like the power that's built in that basically enables you to connect with and engage with your customers or people outside your organization and like connect them directly to data that you have in your organization so that you can serve them better. I think it's really cool. I do think that it is quite a bit of effort in some cases to build some of those pages and make them look beautiful because ultimately many of those things end up being public facing, either websites or portals that your customers are going to engage on. and you want them to be beautiful and maybe even cutting edge HTML and CSS and all of that good stuff. And that takes a little bit more work, and I don't mean necessarily difficult brain complex work, more tedious copy paste work. And so if there's anything that I would knock it on, it would be that type of method of updating and creating those custom pages. But all in all, I think it's a really cool solution. And we're starting to see more use and more traction with the folks that we work with on a daily basis, where that's starting to make some sense.
Yeah, I'll say I'm off camera, but my experience building a portal was build a website with a website builder and copy it into Power Apps portals and change out some of the guts to make it work with Power Apps portals.
So the designer/dev studio environment that you get for Power Apps portals or pages is just not there. Yeah.
Well, the big thing is you get what you get, right? Like, it is what it is, and a lot of it, quite frankly, is old, right? Like, they're doing a lot of work to modernize it. They've been doing a lot of work to modernize it, but it is old. But with that said, if you are looking to have you have a whole bunch of workflow that involves interacting with outside parties, portals is phenomenal, right? If you need to have complex interactions with customers or other outside entities and you want to do it in a custom way, portals is a great option for you, especially if that data is either already stored in Dataverse or you want it to be stored in Dataverse. Yep. If you're looking you have one form that you want an external party to go submit to you for one thing, and they just submit the form and they don't get a status and they don't have any other action they do, it probably is overkill. That's a lot of work
for something like that. You could just share a Microsoft form.
You could do Microsoft Form, and if you don't like the Microsoft Form, there's other third parties that'll integrate with Power Automate. There's a lot of other options.
Yep. Yeah, so I would definitely, we've always been very pragmatic about all the stuff that we do. I would look at something like that and kind of try to get a gut feel for what the overall cost of ownership is, right? Obviously, there's licensing costs.
There's monthly costs for the licenses.
Monthly licensing costs. And if you've already bitten off Dataverse licenses, for example, or Power Apps licenses,
then it makes
for
a lot of sense.
People, it can make a lot of sense.
Quite frankly, a lot of the portals, the portal functionality came from Dynamics, like everything else with Power Apps, right? And so the concept there is I'm already using Dynamics for CRM or for some other management with my internal business, right? And I just need to now interact with my customers. Great. Portals is a great fit for you. That is a phenomenal. In fact, Microsoft has components that already build out. That's where it all came from. Yep. If you don't have that and you're starting from scratch, it can be a challenge.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, Encodian. Yeah. That's the one. That's one of the ones I was looking for. Yep.
All right. It looks like you're also working on a leave application. If we create an event calendar in SharePoint that has recurring events that can be set, can that be accessed and shown in a calendar in Power Apps, or do I need to create a list containing the holidays and reference that list? That's a good question.
If I create an event in the calendar in SharePoint as a recurring events,
so
can be accessed and shown on a calendar in Power Apps, or would I need to create a list containing the holidays and reference that list?
So I would say one of the first questions here is, let's talk about SharePoint calendars and recurring events and the deficit or the gap that's there. So I think for many years, recurring events have been a bit of a challenge in SharePoint calendars. If you know anything about the back end and how the data is stored, and you're querying a SharePoint calendar for events, you'll find that when you expect the second instance of that item to show up and you do a search for that in that week when it's supposed to show up, it won't show up. Because the search that's happening against the indexed data is looking at the first date or first occurrence of that event, as opposed to every occurrence.
There's a bunch of special logic in and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it very specially. I'm going to be very specific and just careful with how I talk about this because it can get very confusing very quickly. So SharePoint's classic events list has recurring events. Those events, if I were to create the event for this past July 4th, as an example, and I make it recurring, technically, from a raw data perspective, that's the only event that exists. They do a bunch of fancy magic on the front end to go, oh, yeah, that's a recurring event. I'm going to virtually make it exist in these other spots.
Calculate the next one. Yep.
And what that means is if you ever use SharePoint Search to go look for the event, as Mike was saying, you're not going to find that recurring event. It just doesn't exist. Now, likely because of this problem that they have, modern lists, I'm not going to call them events lists, but of lists that have events data in them, they don't support recurring events at all. Like,
Right.
you just don't have the option anymore, okay? So that's, I think, the first thing to realize. I don't know what Microsoft's plan on that is. I haven't seen any specific detail about where they're going with that, but that's the reality of today.
Okay.
If you want recurring events, you use a classic one, you use the classic web part to show the classic content, and that's just what you get.
The next thing I think we can talk about in relationship to this is, so we've had some of our clients who have had a need for recurring things, anniversaries, birthdays.
Yeah.
And we have solved that. How?
So for us, what we have done is, none of them have been calendar. That's the first thing I'll say. But what we've done for like employee directory as an example. So I want to show on my portal, I want to show an employee's birthday every year or an anniversary every year, right? Their work anniversary. We create a list and then we have an automated flow that basically updates that so that the only people who have an anniversary or birthday in the next, let's say, 2 weeks have the date in that list set to be the date that it's supposed to be. Everything else is for the previous time frame. And that's worked well. I think it works just fine. I think it works well for people. It's not great for somebody who wants to go look at in the future, only in the future for when the next ones are. But if you understand how it works fine for them. We've done other things like that to make it work in the modern experience.
Yep.
For other people, we've embedded the classic web part on a page because there's not much else you have. Like, there's not much other option, right? If you want overlays, if you want recurring events, you don't have a lot of other options. Specific to your question, I'm not exactly what you mean by shown on a calendar in Power Apps. 100%, because I don't believe there's like a true calendar control. Like, I don't think there is one.
There are examples out there where you can go
build your own
calendar control. Right?
But it's not out of the box.
Right.
So I'm not 100% sure where you're going with that.
My familiarity with those when we've built them is they're basically horizontal/vertical galleries. They give you the days for the month.
Yep.
And there's absolutely no reason you couldn't manipulate the cell
to call the right thing.
To have the data in it for a recurring.
Correct. Yep. Right. I just wasn't sure what you meant. Using the galleries. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Just allow your mic in case you wanted to jump in, just so you know.
Christina, if you wanted to allow your mic, you can jump in. But the recurring events I would put on for like a customer, like holidays, I would include in the in a classic events list because you can do recurring events, and I would use that to pull my data. I'm pretty but I would need to go test because I haven't used one for this purpose. I assume the API that it's calling I know it's not search, but I presume that it will actually show you the recurring events in the right day. But I guess I've never tried that. I've never actually used that in this particular case.
You could use search to go after it if it was.
Well, but search won't work if it's a recurring event.
Yeah. So you have to figure out some way to build the data set.
Yeah.
Right, in the Power App. So you would need either the ability to have every one of those events listed on every day that it happens, or you would need to be able to calculate it yourself in the Power App, which I think you could do. I think it would be a bit complex. But then in that calendar control, you would just simply need to add the logic to apply that data set to the highlighted days, I guess.
Let's spell it out a little bit for Christina. Let's say she's trying to build an app. What's the best way to get events to display easily?
I mean, It really depends on what she's trying to do. She says a leave application, which implies that I'm trying to, that to me, that implies I am, as an end user, trying to request leave. That's my assumption.
All right, she's unmuted. Let's see if she.
Hi guys.
Hey,
So basically it's like where you can apply for vacation, for sick and whatnot, and everyone in the organization can apply for it. However, you want to show who applied for it when, so that when you're applying, you know that all right, this person is out that time, because and that's where the calendar will come into play to show everyone else's vacation or sick days and whatnot. So like let's say for vacation, you're showing anyone on vacation on the calendar. So when you apply, you will know if you're allowed to take it or if you're not allowed to take it.
yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to go about this. I think one way to do it, because the actual request for vacation is really simple. It's like you just need a drop down or a calendar control to request to say, hey, I want these dates,
A
right?
date range, right?
The challenge is, well, I want to be able to choose ones that are open. And the one way to do that would be, I think, where you're headed down, which is to say, I'm going to show a big calendar with everybody's stuff on it, and then you can pick days that are free, right? And that's the way I'm going to pick my days off. And you can do that. I think you could do that. I think that's 100% doable. I think that's a lot of work. I think it would be way easier to have them select a date and say, hey, by the way, there's 4 other people that are not available, or simply display a list of when it's possible for them to get it. So you could do something where instead of showing other people's vacation, you could say, hey, these days are available and these days aren't. And so then the processing behind the scenes is really about, oh, I'm on this month, on this day, are there 3 people who are on vacation? Well, then I'm not going to let you do it, right?
I'll say the way that we do it here is just a group calendar.
Yeah, we have a group calendar, and people put their stuff on. Every individual puts their stuff on the calendar. Mm-hmm. My guess is that won't work for you because you actually want to have someone approve the vacation time.
Yeah, somebody needs to approve it as well.
Yeah, which means you don't really want it to show on the group calendar until it's been approved.
Is it literally if somebody else is on vacation on July 5th, I cannot request vacation on July 5th? How complex is that?
It depends on how many people in that specific department will be on vacation. So it's like maybe a 1-to-5 ratio. So basically, let's say it have 10 people. We'll have 2 people go on vacation once they within that same department.
Yeah.
So I think I might look at this in a way that would be a SharePoint list, nothing special, but it would be every list item or record would have like a department identifier, a date,
And how many people?
and a counter.
Yeah, you could do that too.
And then every time somebody requests and gets approved, I go update those dates for that department. I increment the counter. And then every time somebody is looking to take time off, I basically go get the data from that list and figure out what days are available based on the counter being below a certain number.
Yeah, so the next question would be, do you need a calendar that shows exactly who has off what days? And if you need that, then what Mike is suggesting won't necessarily work for that purpose, but you could have 2 calendars, one that shows the counters, because the reason to do the counter is it's way easier to do the display part that you're talking. It'll be way faster and easier to do that. It won't be possible to say, well, unless you put it in the title of it, on the title of the item, these are the people that are taking this off on this day, something.
Like I'm thinking SharePoint, right? And you have a bit of a challenge because you have a limit to the number of records you can pull in, which shouldn't be okay unless you have like a whole bunch of departments, right? Because you're essentially talking about 365.
Yeah, but if you're filtering a
rows
month at a time, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, it depends on how you're filtering it, right? But if you're trying to do something, maybe plan a year
in advance,
right?
yeah, at a
it could
time.
be a challenge. But I think that would be a fairly simple way to manage it.
Yeah. I can think of a couple different ways, but
I think that
it's doable.
querying the list data from that type of a list as opposed to thinking of it in terms of a calendar would be much easier.
Correct, especially if you're having to design it yourself in Power Apps anyways. because you don't care what the data format is at that point.
Right.
I don't
Understood.
know. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, basically I might have to do the both ways because for the approval, uh, on the approval and the approval will need to see who is on vacation or
specific
anything else like
people.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In order to know if to approve it or not. But on the selection side for
So you could
the
still
employee,
do it. Add another column to that same
For the
thing,
people.
and just add a concatenated list of the people's names.
Make it a people picker, people
make it a
field,
people picker and add 'em
multiple
to it.
person people picker.
Right.
Yeah, that might be an okay way to go about it.
Yep.
Like, I'm not gonna say that it's super easy. Like, that's not, you're not talking about a half an hour solution. But I think that would work. Something like that would work. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
it does. Thanks so much.
Not a problem.
You're welcome.
So we've got another question from Emily.
Emily, yep.
Emily, I'm the person that gathers requirements, creates the solution, does testing, troubleshooting, etc. I'm always looking for ways to improving in these areas. All that to say, for more of the complex process, I'd like to improve best practice in gathering requirements. So best practice for gathering requirements is interesting. I'll talk about requirements, but you also mentioned testing, troubleshooting. I'm pretty sure you were the person that was talking about the multiple environments. So having 2 environments for you or 3 is going to be huge. So being able to make changes that you can make a change in one environment and test it yourself, and then deploy it somewhere else and say, hey, I want you to go look at it before I deploy it to production, will be huge. So when they talk about getting you an HR environment, don't get an HR environment. Get 3 HR environments. Now, if it was more than just you doing this, best practice. You talk about best practice. You only have rights in the development environment. In the test environment, you have less rights, and in the production environments, you pretty much have no rights. That's best practice, right? Because that follows common development process, right? That doesn't work for you, right? Like you're wearing all the hats, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Your organization doesn't have those different roles, and that's okay. I would still try to leverage those environments. You will find huge benefits in being able to test stuff for yourself in your own environment and not mess anything up, not have something bad go wrong and break something for a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Like it'll be way better for you.
So I think the other thing that can be aided by that is in the refining your requirements.
Yeah, so that's what I was just
Right.
going to say. So that bleeds into the requirements thing, which is to say, now you have a development environment, you can go throw a potential update and say, hey, check it out. What do you think?
Yeah, so one of the huge benefits of no-code, low-code, you have to recognize is the ability to rapidly build a functional prototype and actually put it in front of somebody. So you could literally have a half hour, 1 hour session with your stakeholders, and they could give you kind of some ideas about what they want. You could go quickly build that thing because no-code, low-code lets you do that so quickly and get it in front of them so that they can actually put their hands on it and give you that feedback loop much more quickly. The other thing I'll say is, as part of that requirements gathering thing, one of the new things that was just kind of released or announced at this most recent Ignite from Microsoft was the ability to take a Figma design. So if that's a design tool that you use, you can actually generate a Power App from a Figma design file, which is pretty cool. And then the other thing is you can also generate a Power App from a sketch on a napkin. So you can take a photo of that sketch, or maybe you sketched it on a whiteboard or something like that, and you can actually automatically generate an application, a screen, in a Canvas app, which can be a way to speed up that process as well.
Yeah, so those tools will be really good if you use Balsamic, or you're used to using Figma, or you're used to using any of these tools that are wireframing tools, or in the case of Figma, full-on design tools, and want to go easily from that. So some people work with designers, and the designer takes those requirements and does those things. They can do those things, and you can import the app into Power Apps so that you have a starting point that looks familiar to what they're doing. Much like what Mike's saying, like when you talk about best practices for gathering requirements, it's a hard thing. People who are, if you're gathering requirements, if the reason you're gathering requirements is to create an estimate that you're going to be held accountable to at a live or die kind of situation, or pass fail kind of situation. If you go over by 1 hour, you fail, and if you're under, or if you're not under by too much, you're okay, you're good. It can be a real challenge because getting the requirements down to the level you need to be super, super accurate is difficult. Now, if you're doing that requirement gathering to get a rough idea of where we're headed and get a good place to start and where to go, I think it's a lot different. That's generally speaking where you want to be in this low-code world, mostly because you can change things very easily, and the limitations are real and they are great. Right? Just because an end user says they want drag and drop whatever, you can't necessarily give them that. But if that's what they had in their head, and you didn't plan for that in what you were going to do, and you don't have a way to argue with them enough to get them to not do it, your estimate can be blown to heck, right? So what you really want to do is you want to get into, as quickly as you can, into a mode where you iterate really fast, right? You got to get there. You got to get to a point where you can iterate. Mike, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Emily, she raised her hand, and I
Oh, she
allowed
did?
her to unmute, so you're welcome to jump in.
Is that what you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to simply highlight what you're talking about is really the difference
Let her
between.
jump in.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say that what you're talking about is the difference between a waterfall project lifecycle and agile lifecycle, right? So I think the question for her is, like, what do you do? Are you in a waterfall mode, or are you agile?
I was muted. That's why you couldn't hear me.
Okay.
There
Can
we
you
go.
guys hear me now?
Yeah, we
We
can.
can.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Emily. So yeah, I operate on an agile mode. So I typically gather requirements, and it's the latter. Mitch. So basically, I get the requirements. It's not I get the requirements more so people like begging me, we need help. Do anything to help us. We're doing this via email through spreadsheets. So
Yeah.
Oh, I love
so
that. That's a low bar.
yeah. So
Yeah. So
so
I was just going to say, in that environment where you're just getting people who really want your help, for me, the most important things is to understand the high level goal. So we often, very, 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 very often, in fact, almost always want to ask, why are you doing that, right? Like if somebody says, I'm doing this in email, what are you doing in email and why, right? Like, how does this fit into your process and how does it work overall? I get, I'll give an example from a customer. Somebody's like, we have this old on-premise SharePoint that has workflow and we moved it into the cloud and it's never worked and I need it to work. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't help me. There's no magic button to say, make it the same. So tell me more, right? Like what is going on? And come to find out what's going on is they have a third-party app that sends an email to somebody and that email has some content and they, instead of building like an integration between that system and a third-party system, they are watching a shared mailbox, they grab the content of the email and they shove it into a list. The list triggers a workflow to ask somebody to approve it. They go look at it, they say, I like it, and then when they like it, they take it and manually enter it into a third-party system. Like that's what they were doing. And ultimately they end up keeping the same, they kept the same process, but and the reason they're keeping the same process is because they're upgrading that other system in the next year. And when they do the upgrade, they're going to go back and figure out a better way. But they weren't even having the conversation with that other partner for this new project because everybody's like, they don't think beyond that, right? And so one of the things, best practices around requirements gathering is I would ask where I can, where they'll let you ask more questions and get into what's going on behind the scenes. But then I would only gather enough requirements to get something out there to show them, get a good idea of accomplishing their task. I wouldn't get into a lot of detail about design. I wouldn't get a lot of detail about I wouldn't get into a ton of detail. I would build a version of it that does what they say they need it to do, and say, try it out. Let's review it, and what do you want changed? So I don't know if that helps, but that's what I would recommend. Mike, did you have anything else on that?
No, I think that's fair. I think, like as you mentioned, the outcome, like what are we trying to achieve with it? That's important. The why. I think we also do some things where we talk to the stakeholders and say, what are you worried about? What are you hoping this thing is going to do?
Yeah. So
and so that helps us to get aligned with that team, so that we identify potential pitfalls, like stuff we don't want to have happen early in that effort, and then ultimately we, by understanding the hopes that they have, we know what it might take to make their dreams come true.
yeah.
Right?
So you just said words that really triggered something to me that I didn't mention that I think is really absolutely critical, and I'm glad you brought it up. We want to always make sure that we're talking at least at one time to what we would consider to be the stakeholders of that business process. A lot of times you end up talking to
The middleman.
a technical person or a person who's just doing it. I want to talk to who will be screaming if this doesn't work, right? Like that's who we want to talk to at least one time and ask them exactly what my hopes and fears. Like, what are you hoping this helps you fix? What are you afraid that it won't fix, or that it, what'll happen as part of it? Those types of questions can help you immensely in assuading the word I'm looking for.
I mean, you can certainly
Getting
assuage
rid of.
some of their concerns, because
Yeah.
when you ask those questions, right, you can actually have an upfront conversation about, like,
Yeah.
that sounds like a really terrible thing. Why are you afraid of that? Like,
Or-
help me understand that.
Or
right?
that is a concern. You're right. That's something that you should be worried about, and
Yep.
you guys need to do something about that, or we can do something about that.
Right. Yep. That's exactly right. And so that's a fairly important, and I think even early in my career, like that's something that I failed to do, didn't understand the real value behind it.
Yeah, we wouldn't do it. We
But-
wouldn't do it as formally. Like literally, we will have a hopes and fear conversation as one of the first things we do on a project to ask all the stakeholders, including we talk about that person including the conversation. It's not that we wouldn't include them, but everybody, including the stakeholders, to say what are your hopes, what are your fears, so that we can deal with them up front.
Yep. Absolutely.
I love that. Thank you, guys. I will add that to my list of questions and repertoire. I've been doing this for a while, but this last project that I got, they have so many stakeholders, and they're not even sure the process themselves. I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
we need to. So I just started, look, I'm going to build something and let you guys look at it, because we're just going.
So you brought up another avenue of this that's a challenge. One problem is trying to get a hold of all the stakeholders. Another problem is I got a hold of all the stakeholders and I got 50 of them. What am I supposed to do? Because they all can't agree.
Right.
It depends on the position, like where you are related to other people. A lot of times in that scenario, I will try to make them choose someone that is in charge. So a lot of times that'll be a project manager, or it'll be a major group that has the most to gain out of this thing. But I'm not going to answer, I want input from you all. I want to hear you all. I want to talk to you all. But I need one person that's going to make a call and is going to deal with a scenario where you guys need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to be, that's not a good role for me to play. Unless if you want me to play that role, this project gets longer, it gets more drawn out. I'm gonna have to be way more involved in your stuff, right?
Yep.
And I'm not playing the role of a citizen developer anymore. I'm playing the role of a change manager, or of a project manager, or there's 7 other roles that you would be playing, and that doesn't make any sense either, right? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but having that, even if you get all those people in the room, you can uncover those things by having the discussion about hopes, fears,
Oh yeah,
and outcomes.
oh yeah,
Right, you're gonna find out where people are not aligned really quick.
correct. Yeah. Cool.
Super helpful. Thank you, guys.
You're
Not a
welcome.
problem.
I wanted to point out, Emily posted a question a few days ago, or maybe a week or so. She was listening to our podcast where we talked about not using SharePoint to build apps.
Oh yeah.
And we weren't descriptive enough, because because she thought maybe we were saying like don't use SharePoint with Power Apps and
Oh yeah.
like.
No.
Do you want to clarify or add any context to that?
Yeah, I got scared for a minute. I'm
Yeah,
glad that wasn't the case.
So early in our careers, Matt and I both worked for Microsoft consulting shops. And it was back in the day of SharePoint 2010, 2013,
2009.
right? Like
Yeah.
old school SharePoint. 2007, I think, was the first
Yeah,
version we
2007.
worked
Yeah, 2007.
And at that time, SharePoint was being sold by Microsoft as the end game scenario, like the tool that you should build all of your business applications with. And we ended up in situations where the sales team had sold a project where SharePoint was going to be the platform that we had to build some crazy custom bleeding edge application on top of. And in some of those cases, it wasn't even business internal apps. They were actually like, we're going to build this as a product that customers are going to pay us for, and it's all going to be living on SharePoint, but nobody's going to really know that it's SharePoint. And at that time, that's when SharePoint had an option of public-facing site, right, as an actual thing, which today the equivalent would be the Power Apps portals or pages, and which is no longer SharePoint, by the way. Take note of that. But that's what they were trying to sell, and so we'd get on those projects and pull our hair out.
Well, we'd make it work.
For months to try to make it work.
It would cost 3 times what it should cost, and yeah.
Yep. So the lesson learned after all of those years is, you can't necessarily do anything and everything with SharePoint. You can do a lot with it. And fortunately, I think the story for SharePoint, in particular, once we've moved to SharePoint Online and the modern experience, is people are they're taking to it more easily and using it for what it's good for.
Well, there are a lot more. People I think have, number one, they've learned that choosing a platform like SharePoint as your data store or as your basis for your technology comes with limitations, and you're just going to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Part of that is because Microsoft has said, well, now that we're in SharePoint Online and you don't just have a server that you can go install a SQL job that does some bad stuff to some SQL tables that you got, you just can't do what you could do before. Like, you literally cannot make the customizations that you could make before. Right. That's one. Before, even though Microsoft's development team would tell you not to do it, the sales team would go, this is a $2 million project. We got to do this. You can make it happen. They really have to have it work that way. And, it was just problematic because they were doing it for licensing, right? Like, they were getting licenses from the deal, and so that's what they were all worried about. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is specific to what we were talking about on the podcast. It's still true today that there are lots of apps that I would not choose SharePoint as the platform for, right? But it's not because SharePoint's not a good platform. It's because who I'm dealing with isn't willing to accept the limitations. They want more related to user experience and security, et cetera, than SharePoint can do, right? Yeah. And you should always be thinking about that. I mean, choosing any platform across the board is a choice. And doing it comes with limitations and.
I think one of the limitations when you talk about that is easier to talk about because it's a bit more concrete when we hit it, is when you're thinking about using SharePoint as your data backbone. Yes, you can use the SharePoint front end to access that data, but let's say you want to use Power Apps, you very quickly get into limitations about the number of rows, for example, that you can bring into your Power App. And that's a real challenge. And so if you're going to deal with a data set that's got 100,000 records right away, I'm going to say SharePoint's not the tool.
Or right? Actual, like, real, honest to goodness security related to fields, right?
Field
like
level security, yeah.
That doesn't exist in Share. Like, if anybody was wondering out there in the greater interweb, that doesn't exist. There is no such thing as field level security within SharePoint. I actually built a thing back for 2007 in the old on-premises that would actually do it, like would do it for the most part. But in the current world, you cannot do it. It's not possible. And the reason is because I, as a user, get permission at the item level. That's the most granular you can go. And even if I hide that thing all over the place and try to make it go nowhere, I can open up PowerShell or REST API and do whatever I want.
And get to that data. So when you hit those hard limitations, those things that are more concrete, it's a lot easier to make a decision to say, well, we can't use SharePoint. We should use Dataverse or SQL Server or something else. I think when it comes to the UX, user experience type things, and just like, is the user going to be okay editing data in a modern list, right? Like that's a more fuzzy area, I think, when you get into requirements, and that's something that you can review with your users. Like, does this make sense to you? Are you willing to edit in this list?
Yeah. So the one last thing I'll say on this is that Microsoft has transformed where I think they really are going with this, which is to say, SharePoint is really great for somebody who wants to build something using the SharePoint UI primarily and do all of that stuff. The moment you want to start dealing with real data and real stuff, you should be thinking about Power Apps and the Dataverse. Like, if you aren't thinking about that as your end game, even if you start building it in SharePoint and doing all of your stuff there, if this is a heavy enterprise application that you're looking at building, you should not be looking at using SharePoint for that in the long term. It's fine to start with. It's fine.
Great prototyping tool.
Prototyping. It's even fine medium term if it's low volume.
Yep.
People are comfortable with the SharePoint user interface. It's totally fine. At some point, you're likely going to need to go there. You're likely going to need to move it to a Dataverse environment and provide another way to get access to it. And if you're not thinking that way, you're kind of fooling yourself a little bit, because you're going to find that the Dataverse is way easier to develop. Like, it's where all of the things that Microsoft has been trying to do since 2007 have actually become a little bit of reality, right? Yeah. Between model-driven apps and Canvas apps, it is where you want to be if you're really doing a lot of development of custom solutions.
And that's not to say that it's all there.
No, like
right?
I said,
Microsoft
it's not all the way. Yeah, it's not.
Microsoft is a what do they call it? They do a little bit of everything, but no specific thing all the way.
Yeah, they 80%. They do
none.
Yeah, master of none, right?
They do 80% of the things really, really well, and that 20% they don't do it all or don't do well.
Right. But they're slowly plotting.
Oh, it's getting there. It's like, if you look at what it is today versus even 2 years ago, it's way better. Yeah. I have one, Emily, before we move off this, did we scare you, or does that make a lot of sense?
No. Definitely, I was gonna request another YouTube video in the future as to what point should we be, because all of what we do is in SharePoint, right? Because for us, HR is a support organization, so we typically never have money, or they say, no, that's too much money. So we're like, whatever, I'm not gonna even ask, because we support almost 20,000 employees. So then the licensing, you need to get licenses for everybody. Yeah. It's just like a lot of money that we're just not going to be given. So
yeah, so I think it's a great question. Mile, I think the only thing I could recommend at this point would be people should be talking about it. An organization your size probably has enterprise agreements with Microsoft. You can get deals on this stuff. I'm sure Microsoft would love to sell a bunch of licenses to you guys. It needs to be in somebody's ear, because what you'll often find is somebody else in the organization is looking at using CRM or using something else. And by the by, if you buy a CRM license, you get you get licenses for some of these things, or at least partway licenses for these things. It is somebody should be talking about it, whether or not it happens today or tomorrow, or it is what it is.
I think it forces a conversation where, particularly at larger organizations, when you start to use the Power Platform and you start to say, oh, I have to spend money to use it effectively, right? I need to buy 20,000 licenses, for example. Yeah. The organization will then have a strategic conversation about, what does the Power Platform mean for our business?
Correct.
And are we going to do something different? Or is this the platform that we're going to build everything on? So having those conversations is really good at a high level, at a strategic level.
So we just had another comment about this coming in from YouTube that says, the no money thing doesn't change the bigger the company. In fact, it gets worse. And it's, I can attest to the money thing it's not a big or small money, small company problem. It's just different depending on which way you're looking at it and how it's going. So
I like small company better. It's easier to make the decisions.
yeah, you only have a few people to convince.
Right. Which is why I like my small company.
Yeah.
Can I say something super quick, you guys?
Sure.
I think for us, my leadership has always been like, yeah, what do you need? It's just convincing them, why do we need to move that way? You've been able to produce all this work with SharePoint.
Yeah.
Tell me, like, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, so that's the big thing is that what we're talking about is a organizational change. It's not a tactical thing, right? The problem they have, I can break it down for you fairly simply right now. Right now, most likely, I'm going to guess, if you were to win the lottery, because I was told not to say hit by a bus in the past meetings, that's too morbid.
But now you said it.
No, I did. You're right. But if you win the lottery and you don't come to work tomorrow, they're in huge trouble, probably, right? Not only are you the only one that probably understands all of these things, everything's in your name, in your control, not by your point, not because you made it that way, just because that's how that works, right?
Right.
Doing things in environments, number one, is better, but then doing things in Dataverse and in the Power Platform proper, all of those things get a lot easier, right? Your ability to manage those things, maintain those things, change those things, it's a completely different paradigm. It is the only place that you truly are getting into true citizen development, not citizen customization and not citizen, WYSIWYG doing other things. Like, there are very, very, very strong parallels between development practices that happen in the Power Platform and in Dataverse and what happens in traditional development, mostly because it's more like a SQL backend or a database DB backend. You have a lot more control. You're talking about a lot of the same things. You can interface with the things very similarly. That's not an answer to your real question, and I think creating a YouTube video would be really interesting on this topic or another
We can talk about
podcast.
the trade-offs, right?
Yeah,
Like
100%.
I've got one SharePoint developer that builds all my business apps. What are the risks associated with that? And how much will that potentially cost me? Versus we're going to do this on the Power Platform and we're going to do it with automation accounts and multiple owners and a team, right? And how much is that going to cost me?
Yeah,
right,
and the big thing is if you're going to go down that path of doing all those other things, you might as well buy the licenses, right? Like, that's the point. Isn't so much that they don't have to keep doing it the same way, but this way that they're doing it is a risk to the business. If that's, and it's not to, and I want to be really, really clear, that's not to mean that what you're doing is bad. You should, even if you have all of these other things and you have those licenses, there's scenarios I would 100% use SharePoint for. Like, we'd use it today. There's no question I would use that still. But that flexibility to be able to choose the right tool for the job, the right tool for what I'm trying to do today, is really important when an organization has chosen this is the platform that we want to use for this type of work.
Now, the other thing to bear in mind is, like Matt mentioned, Microsoft would love to sell 20,000 licenses at a discount.
For sure.
They would do it in a heartbeat.
In a heartbeat.
The other
and
thing
in
I'll say
4
is,
years, it wouldn't be at a discount, though, just to be clear.
like, depending on what you're building, it doesn't have to be a per user license for all 20,000 users. It could be a per app license.
Per app license, yeah.
for
If you can
50
make it work.
users, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it just depends on your scenario.
I'm trying to make sure. Oh, no, I don't. I thought I was running into another meeting, but I'm not. Because I know we're going over.
We did go over a little bit.
We did, yeah. Any other questions? I don't think so. I don't think I see anything else. Not a problem, Emily. Glad you guys were able to join us today.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. It was a good conversation.
Yeah.
Got into some good topics.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll be back first Wednesday of next month. Earlier in chat, I posted a link to our newsletter if you want to keep up with what we're doing and get Office 365 tips in your inbox every week. Go there and sign up, and we'll keep in touch. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.